It was 2002, but Elon Musk was already living in 2032. The world outside his Bel Air rental pulsed with the sleepy rhythm of midnight, but inside, time bent around him like gravity around a black hole. The living room, dimly lit by the desk lamp that hadn't been turned off in 2 days, resembled a war room at NASA, only smaller, more chaotic, and fueled by raw obsession rather than protocol. Sheets of engineering sketches layered the coffee table like sedimentary rock. The dining table, long forgotten as a place to eat, had become a launch pad for dreams, trajectories scribbled in black ink, equations written sideways, a globe of Mars spinning idly between 2 empty energy drink cans. Nevada, his infant son, lay asleep in a second-hand portable crib by the wall. His tiny fists twitched now and then as if grappling with dreams far too large for his few months of life. Every so often, a soft baby sigh escaped into the room, but Elon didn't hear it. Not because he didn't care, he did deeply, but because his mind was consumed, engulfed, consumed by something he couldn't let go of, the future. SpaceX wasn't a company to Elon. It was a lifeline, a necessity, a moral obligation. Humanity had to become a multi-planetary species. That belief burned in him brighter than any rocket flame he intended to build. He paced back and forth barefoot on the hardwood floor, his cell phone cradled between his shoulder and ear, muttering terms like turbo pump efficiency and LOX tank insulation into the receiver. The engineers on the other end were half asleep, but Elon was relentless. Sleep for him had become a fossil of a previous life. Across the room, Justine watched. She sat curled on the edge of the couch, cradling a now-silent baby monitor in one hand and a half-drunk cup of chamomile tea in the other. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy knot, strands escaping across her cheek like punctuation marks for emotions she didn't voice. Her green eyes followed Elon, not with admiration, but with something quieter, something more resigned, a kind of aching distance. They had once stayed up this late together in the early days, not with spreadsheets and mock-ups, but with novels and music and slow conversations about everything and nothing. She had fallen in love with the man who talked about changing the world, not with the man who now seemed to be trying to escape it. "Elon," she whispered. He didn't respond. He was scribbling something, likely a correction to the second stage nozzle configuration, and tapping it against a calculator like it owed him an answer. She tried again, louder. "Elon." He looked up, blinking as if waking from a deep, technical trance. "Yeah." She hesitated. The silence that followed was thick. She glanced at Nevada, then back at her husband. "Nothing," she said finally. "It can wait." He gave a distracted smile and nodded, already halfway back into his schematics. But it couldn't wait. Not really, because for weeks now, Justine had been waking up in the middle of the night with Nevada's cries and realizing she was alone, even when Elon was lying right beside her. His mind had drifted to orbit, and she was left to circle the gravity well of daily life on Earth. The feedings, the diapers, the midnight rocking. And not once, had he asked how she was coping. Not because he was cruel, but because he was building something she feared might never include her again. Elon spoke suddenly, as if remembering she was in the room. "I figured out the oxidizer ratio. I think we can reduce engine weight by 12% without sacrificing thrust." Justine nodded. "That's great," she said, her voice neutral. "I mean, that's huge. We're talking millions in savings. And faster turnaround between launches. I'm happy for you." He didn't hear the undertone. He didn't hear the silence screaming between her words. He was back in the matrix, calculating escape velocity with the same energy other men save for anniversaries and babies' first steps. Nevada stirred. Justine rose immediately, her movements precise and practiced. She picked him up with the grace of someone who'd done this dozens of times. Nevada whimpered softly, resting his cheek against her shoulder. She rocked him gently and looked at Elon, who hadn't moved. "Elon," she said again, more gently this time. "You should hold him." He glanced up, startled. "Now?" "Yes, now." He's your son." There was a beat, an awkward shift in the air. Then Elon stood, hesitant, and reached out. Justine handed Nevada over with the softness of a sigh. The baby blinked up at his father, half awake, then nestled in, sensing something familiar, but not yet frequent. Elon held him like he was holding a foreign object made of glass. "He's heavier than I expected," he said, more to himself than anyone. "Babies grow," Justine replied, "even when you're not looking." He nodded, eyes on the child. Nevada's tiny fingers brushed against his chin, then latched instinctively onto a fold of his t-shirt. Elon's heart thumped. He felt it, a quiet, slow awe. Not unlike the moment a rocket first leaves the pad. Something irreversible had been set in motion. For a while, neither of them spoke. Justine looked at the two of them, father and son, awkward and imperfect in their connection. A small part of her wanted to believe this could work, but a louder part whispered what she'd already begun to plan. She turned back to the couch, exhaling deeply, and stared at the blank wall across from her. Elon sat down with Nevada still in his arms, finally still, finally present, if only for the moment. And so the night deepened. A startup was being born in Hawthorne, and something fragile was breaking in Bel Air. But maybe, just maybe, something else was also beginning. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you pause or feel, leave a like. And if you want to follow where this emotional journey goes next, go ahead and subscribe. Not because I asked, but because you want to see how this rocket lands. The sunlight filtered through the half-open blinds in a series of fractured stripes, cutting across the tiled floor like a barcode no one could scan. The clock on the microwave blinked 6:12 a.m. The scent of dark roast filled the kitchen, strong, bitter, overboiled. Elon stood barefoot by the counter, cradling a mug in one hand while the other held a printout of propulsion data sent overnight from the Hawthorne facility. His eyes skimmed the lines of engine performance metrics, his lips murmuring equations as if they were prayer. The kitchen was cluttered, not with dishes or trash, but with the quiet debris of ambition. Laptops were plugged into outlets in odd places. A sketch of a rocket stage was taped to the refrigerator, its edges curling. A soldering iron sat beside the fruit bowl, and a coffee-stained notebook rested dangerously close to the stove. Justine entered quietly, almost ghost-like. She was barefoot, her blonde hair tousled, and her eyes swollen from a night of no sleep, or perhaps from crying. Nevada was in her arms, still in his pajamas, one sock off, one on. The baby yawned and looked around groggily, unaware that something irreversible was about to unfold. "Elon," she said, her voice quiet but not uncertain. "Can we talk?" He didn't look up immediately. "Yeah," he muttered, folding a page and setting it aside. 1 second. She stood still, watching him. Watching the way he kept his back to her. The way his entire body remained slightly tilted toward the report, like gravity hadn't yet shifted to the reality forming in the air between them. "Elon," she said again, firmer this time. "I need to talk now." That pulled him out of orbit. He turned, still holding the coffee, blinking as if he just remembered she existed. "What's wrong?" She took a breath. "I'm leaving." The sentence hung in the air like an echo in a vacuum. Elon's hand froze mid-sip. The mug hovered just below his lips. "What?" he asked, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "I'm leaving," she repeated. "I need to go. I've been thinking about it for months." He set the mug down. It landed too hard on the counter and spilled a dark trail of coffee across the granite. "Leaving where?" he asked, as if geography might undo it. She didn't blink. "Here. This house. This life. I can't do it anymore." Nevada shifted in her arms, babbling something incoherent. Elon looked at his son, then at Justine. "You're not serious." "I'm completely serious," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I can't breathe in this orbit, Elon. You're launching into the future every day, and I'm stuck here. With the diapers, with the silence, with the emptiness." His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked confused, like someone who had just been handed a math problem that couldn't be solved. But Nevada, he finally managed. What about? Nevada? I'm not taking him. Not now. Her eyes glistened but didn't break. You're a good father when you're here. He loves you. And I need to go figure out who I am again without losing my mind. The silence that followed was not just awkward, it was seismic. A fault line of unsaid things split the room in two. Elon rubbed the side of his face, pacing once, then stopping. So that's it? You're just going? Justine looked down at Nevada, kissed his forehead, and gently placed him in the baby seat by the table. The child smiled, unaware. Then she stood straight, met Elon's gaze, and nodded. I've written a list, she said, reaching into her hoodie pocket and pulling out a folded page. Things he likes, things that help him sleep, schedules, foods. You'll figure it out, Elon. You figure everything out. He didn't take the paper. He just looked at it, looked at her, looked at the door behind her like it had grown fangs. You could have told me earlier, he said, softer now. Not accusatory, just broken. I tried, she replied, so many times, but you were always somewhere else. She picked up the duffel bag she'd left by the door. Elon hadn't even noticed it there. She kissed Nevada again, this time with a little tremble in her lips, and then moved toward the stairs. I'll come back, she said, almost as an afterthought, but not until I'm ready. And with that, she disappeared up the staircase, her footsteps light, but each one heavier than the last. Elon stood frozen. Nevada babbled again, waving a hand in the air like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. The report slipped from Elon's other hand, falling to the floor with the soft flutter of irrelevance. The coffee grew cold. The house, which had already felt a bit like a lab, now felt like a hangar after liftoff, empty, echoing, too quiet. He finally picked up the folded paper Justine had left. It was written in neat, precise handwriting. Nevada's favorite lullaby, Space Oddity by David Bowie. Elon let out a breath that bordered on a laugh and a sob. The baby sneezed. Elon bent down, wiped his nose with a napkin, and sat across from him. The two stared at each other for a long moment, father and son, the last two passengers on a ship that had just lost its captain. Outside, the world continued spinning, unaware that something had been fundamentally altered in this kitchen. Inside, Elon Musk, engineer of rockets, master of propulsion, conqueror of technical impossibilities, realized he was about to face the one frontier he'd never calculated for: parenthood alone. The crying started at 1:14 a.m. At first, Elon assumed it would be like the other nights. Nevada would whimper a little, stir, maybe even shout, but then settle with a pacifier and the right balance of white noise from a hallway fan. But this was different. The cry had layers. It rose and fell with erratic waves like a siren from deep space, unpredictable and untamed. Elon stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, hoping the noise would self-correct. It didn't. He shuffled out of bed barefoot again, stepping over a pair of crumpled socks and a notebook still open on thrust-to-weight ratio optimization. He had fallen asleep studying diagrams beside an empty baby bottle and a burp cloth. Nevada's room was only a few feet down the hall, but in that moment, it felt like a journey across a desert. Elon pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by the soft blue glow of a nightlight shaped like Saturn. Nevada's face was a tomato-red mask of fury and need. His tiny fists punched the air like he was fighting off invisible enemies. Tears streaked down his cheeks with full commitment, as if his survival depended on being heard. Hey, buddy, it's okay," Elon whispered, lifting him up awkwardly. His left arm bent at a bad angle, and Nevada immediately arched his back in protest. "Okay, not like that," Elon muttered, trying again. The baby's body was hot against his skin. Elon remembered something about fever. Was it teething? Diaper rash? Was this just a normal cry? Or was something actually wrong? The rule book, if one existed, was nowhere in reach. He carried Nevada into the kitchen. The light overhead buzzed to life, harsh and too white. Elon set Nevada down on a towel on the counter, an emergency changing station improvised from desperation and a lack of sleep. He fumbled with the tabs on the diaper. Too tight? Too loose? The smell hit him like a punch, and he grimaced. He removed the soiled diaper and tossed it into the trash with one hand while grabbing wipes with the other. But Nevada flailed and Elon's hand slipped, sending a wipe skidding across the floor like a paper skate. He finally got a clean diaper on, but something about the angle felt off. It looked puffy on one side, uneven. Was that a problem? Is this even legal? He muttered aloud. This doesn't feel legal. Nevada didn't seem to care. He kept crying louder now, as if offended by the amateur work. Next, the bottle. Elon grabbed a clean one from the drying rack and poured in the pre-measured formula from the fridge. He popped it into the microwave and watched the seconds tick down like a launch countdown. Then he stopped it. That was too long. He remembered something. Wasn't microwave heating uneven? He poured the milk into another bottle to shake it again. The phone in his pocket buzzed. 3 messages. One from Lars asking about the turbopump housing. Another from Gwen with updated timelines. And a third, short and sharp. Need decision on payload spec, can't delay. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and focused on the bottle. He dropped a bit on his wrist. Too hot. Damn. He added some cold water. Nevada wailed louder. Elon winced. The baby's voice seemed to echo into every cell in his body. This was not a failure of science. It was a failure of intuition. Something you couldn't debug. Finally, the bottle was the right temperature. Elon cradled Nevada in the crook of his arm and offered the nipple. The baby latched immediately and drank like he hadn't eaten in days. The silence that followed felt sacred. Elon let out a long, shaky breath. He looked down at the baby's face, those blue eyes, just like his own, fluttering with relief and exhaustion. It was a face he knew he'd never stop loving, but also a face he was terrified of disappointing. As Nevada drank, Elon leaned against the fridge and let his head rest back. The hum of the appliance was the closest thing to peace he'd felt in hours. When the bottle emptied, Elon burped the baby on his shoulder. Nevada let out a sound like a hiccup and then immediately began nodding off. Elon held him a moment longer, just breathing, before returning to the nursery. He laid Nevada in the crib, but the baby stirred. One hand latched onto Elon's shirt, eyes barely open. Elon froze. He remembered a parenting article, something about letting them learn to self-soothe, but Nevada's grip was insistent. He wasn't ready to be alone. Neither, Elon realized, was he. So he laid down on the carpet beside the crib. His head rested against the wooden rail. His shoulder was pressed against a stuffed giraffe. The phone buzzed again. He ignored it. He stared at the ceiling, then at the baby monitor, then at the blue night light. It all felt unreal, like a simulation. He remembered negotiating with investors, facing down hostile boards, pitching impossible ideas to skeptical billionaires. And yet, none of it had made him tremble the way that bottle did. None of it had made him feel this small and this essential at the same time. Nevada sighed in his sleep. Elon closed his eyes. The smell of baby formula, the faint click of the heater, and the light, rhythmic breathing of his son became the new metrics, the new liftoff signals. And in that room, on that carpet, with his body aching and brain fried, Elon Musk understood something no equation had ever taught him. Parenthood wasn't just difficult. It was unknowable, unrepeatable. A rocket launch without telemetry. A blind flight into uncharted orbit. And he was already in it. Alone, awake, and flying by feel. The elevator doors opened to the 17th floor of a mid-rise building in downtown Los Angeles, and Elon Musk stepped out holding a folder under his arm and a faint smear of baby food on the collar of his shirt. He hadn't noticed it. He hadn't noticed much since 6:15 a.m. when Nevada had decided to wake up screaming, his face red from a mild fever and a diaper leak that required a full bedding change. There had been no time for a proper shower. Just a splash of cold water, half a banana, and a half-buttoned shirt. The glass conference room glowed with the cold blue of sunlight bouncing off downtown windows. Inside, for potential investors were already seated, sleek in their suits, nursing lattes, and checking emails on Blackberries. Elon gave a quick smile as he entered, his knuckles white on the folder clasped tightly in his hand. "You made it," said Lawrence, the lead investor, rising to shake hands. He paused. Is that a scratch?" Elon blinked, reached up, and felt a thin, stinging line across his cheekbone. "Not a cat," he said, with the flicker of a smirk. "My son. He's strong for his age." A chuckle rose from the group, but it fizzled quickly. Elon knew the tone. Light amusement, but with a silent undercurrent. This guy doesn't have it together. He moved to the screen and connected his laptop. The SpaceX logo bloomed on the projector wall, and Elon launched into his pitch. He talked about reusability, about disrupting launch monopolies, about engines with fewer parts and faster builds. His eyes lit up when describing the Merlin engine, the Falcon 1, and how one day, soon, anyone could send something to space for a fraction of today's costs. But halfway through, as he clicked to a slide showing a mock-up of the first test launch, he saw it. A yawn, a glance at a watch, a phone screen lit up under the table. He felt a tightness in his chest, not just because he needed this funding, but because he was acutely aware that he did not look like the man who was going to Mars. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, a man who'd been peed on this morning, a man whose greatest victory in the last 24 hours was getting his child to swallow medicine without spitting it back out. He pushed forward, determined. He wrapped the pitch with his signature optimism and offered space for questions. But the energy in the room had cooled. Lawrence nodded politely, but there were no immediate follow-ups. "No excitement, just a we'll be in touch." It wasn't a no, but wasn't the yes he'd needed either. As Elon exited the building, the sunlight hit him like a warning. He checked his phone. 2 missed calls from a nanny. 1 text, he didn't eat lunch. "Keeps crying for you." The drive home blurred. Somewhere along the way, he realized he hadn't eaten. He pulled into a drive-thru and ordered fries, then parked in a lot and stared blankly at them. They tasted like salt and cardboard. He tossed them into the passenger seat, where they landed beside a tiny sock and a container of formula that had been rolling around for days. When he got home, Nevada was asleep in the nanny's arms, red-faced and damp from crying. The nanny gave him a tired look. He kept saying, "Dada, I think he was expecting you." Elon felt it like a pin to the chest. That night, he tried to make dinner, macaroni and cheese, the kind from a box. Simple. Or so he thought. He overboiled the pasta, then underdrained it, then spilled the powdered cheese packet on the counter while holding Nevada, who had woken up mid-prep. In the chaos, he touched the pot handle without a mitt and hissed in pain. He sat down on the kitchen floor, Nevada in one arm, the other under cold water from the sink, and laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh, more like the sound that escapes when everything tips past absurdity. Nevada stared at him with wide, blue eyes, then smiled. "You think this is funny, huh?" Elon whispered, kissing his son's forehead. "You get the deluxe experience." Later that evening, after finally coaxing Nevada to sleep with a lullaby played off YouTube and a slow rock in the chair, Elon opened his laptop to answer emails. There were dozens. Engineering setbacks, launch calculations, supplier delays, legal paperwork. He typed a few lines, then stopped. His brain was mush. His eyes burned. His hands trembled slightly from the strain of the day. This wasn't fatigue from staying up coding, or planning, or debating design specs. It wasn't even the physical wear of lifting a child over and over or changing a crib sheet in the dark. It was the weight of constant emotional presence, of having no margin for error, of being the sole safeguard between chaos and calm hour after hour. There was no off switch for fatherhood. He closed the laptop, let it sit, just for tonight. He poured a glass of water, stood at the window, and looked out at the street lamps glowing in the stillness. The city continued without pause, cars rushing past, voices rising from patios, lights flickering in distant windows. Inside it was quiet, but not peaceful, just waiting. Elon's reflection looked back at him in the window. Hair unkempt, the scratch on his face fading to pink, the hint of baby food still on his shirt despite his best efforts. And in his eyes, something strange. Not just exhaustion, not just ambition, a kind of acceptance. That this messy, overwhelming, profoundly human chaos was now part of the mission. And like all missions, there was no going back. It was 2:16 a.m. The world outside Elon Musk's house in Los Angeles was silent, washed in moonlight, and the occasional flicker of distant traffic. But inside, the stillness was shattered. Nevada was crying again. Not the soft whimper of a restless baby, but the full-throated, red-faced wail of a child whose tiny world felt wrong. Elon sat upright in bed, disoriented, heart racing as if he'd been jolted from a dream of launch pads and propulsion charts. He rubbed his eyes, then listened. Yes, it was Nevada. Again. The nursery light was dim when he entered, casting elongated shadows that danced as he moved. Nevada was standing in his crib now, barely tall enough to hold onto the wooden rail, his cheeks soaked and arms trembling. Elon scooped him up with hands that had steadied rocket designs just hours earlier. This felt infinitely more unstable. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured, cradling him against his chest. "It's just you and me tonight." Again. Nevada's cries didn't stop, not right away. Elon began walking in circles, bouncing slightly, the way he'd seen Justine do 100 times. His arms were sore. He hadn't eaten since noon. His shirt was stained with what might have been applesauce or mashed peas. He didn't know anymore. The house, once shared with Justine, felt colder now. Her absence wasn't just a quiet space at the dinner table. It was an entire dimension missing from the home. Every wall seemed to echo with unfinished conversations and doorways half closed on emotions left hanging. Nevada wouldn't calm down. Elon tried the bottle, but Nevada pushed it away. He changed the diaper, which was already clean. He checked for a fever, normal. Still, the baby cried. Out of desperation, Elon began talking, not in baby talk, but in the language he knew best, ideas. Rockets. Vision. "You know, Nevada," he said softly, pacing, "one day we'll live on Mars. Not just visit. We'll have homes there. And maybe you'll help build them." Nevada blinked through tears, but didn't stop. Elon continued, partly for the baby, partly for himself. "There'll be schools there too. Martian schools. Can you imagine that? History class will include Earth. Back when we lived on Earth, they'll say." He stopped at the window and stared out at the moon. "You'll look up at Earth from Mars the way we look at the moon from here." But still, the crying. Shrill, guttural, relentless. Elon sat down in the armchair and held Nevada close. The baby's face was flushed, and his breath came in short hiccups now. Elon stroked his soft hair, whispering the names of Martian craters as if they were lullabies. Gusev Gale Skeproli? Then, without warning, his own tears came. He wasn't even sure when they started. One moment, he was murmuring nonsense to a baby. The next, his chest ached and the warm sting of salt ran down his cheeks. He wasn't sobbing, just unraveling slowly. The pressure had been building for days, weeks, maybe months. It wasn't just Nevada's crying. It was missing meetings, arriving late, canceling calls. It was investors losing patience, engineers needing decisions. His mind splitting between engine tests and sleep schedules, rocket trajectories and pediatric advice. Every plan felt rushed, every solution incomplete. But most of all, it was the silence where Justine used to be. They hadn't even fought much before she left. That was the part that haunted him. She didn't scream, she didn't slam doors. She simply said she needed to go, that she had lost herself somewhere between Elon's dreams and her own reality. And she had walked away quietly, leaving behind diapers, baby lotion, and a husband trying to design a future with one arm while holding a baby with the other. He looked at Nevada now, eyes finally closing, breath steadying. Elon kissed his forehead and leaned back. His own breathing was shaky. This was the hardest thing he had ever done. Not building PayPal, not starting SpaceX, not launching a rocket. This, feeding a baby at 3 a.m. holding him while he cried. Crying too and not knowing why. Wondering if he was doing it right or just pretending to be okay for the sake of a child too young to know the difference. And still, somewhere deep inside him, that same stubborn voice that had always pushed him forward whispered, "Keep going. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, day after day, night after night, about letting go of the blueprint when the architecture of life shifted unexpectedly. As Nevada finally slept, tiny fingers gripping Elon's thumb with surprising strength, the father exhaled. He wasn't ready, but he was present. And for now, maybe that was enough. It began with a spoonful of mashed banana. Not the kind of milestone that makes headlines or moves markets, but for Elon Musk, it was revolutionary. He sat at the small wooden kitchen table, still sticky from a failed attempt at oatmeal, holding a rubber-tipped spoon like it was a relic from some ancient ritual. Nevada, strapped into a high chair that had taken Elon over an hour to assemble, regarded the spoon with wide, skeptical eyes. Elon leaned in, exaggerated a spaceship sound with his lips, and guided the spoon toward Nevada's mouth. The baby opened up, a small victory already, and then didn't spit it out. He chewed, or at least gummed it, thoughtfully, then smiled. Elon's eyes widened. "You did it," he laughed, standing up and doing an awkward little dance around the kitchen. "You actually ate the banana. Oh my God, Nevada, you're a genius." Nevada clapped his hands, delighted by his father's celebration, even if he had no idea what it was for. Elon spun once more, narrowly missing a pile of laundry on the floor, and bumped into the counter. He didn't care. For the first time in weeks, something had gone right. These moments became his new currency. Small wins. The kind that don't get tweeted or covered by Wired magazine, but that change you anyway. Like managing to clip Nevada's nails without nicking his finger. Or finally figuring out how to balance the bottle on the couch cushion so he could rub the baby's back at the same time. Or finding the perfect lullaby in David Bowie's Space Oddity, which, oddly enough, made Nevada yawn every single time. "Ground control to Major Tom," Elon would whisper, bouncing Nevada gently in his arms, and the baby's eyelids would flutter like tiny satellite dishes looking for a signal. In that song, he found the rhythm of fatherhood, cautious, floating, full of unknowns. At SpaceX, things began to shift too. Elon, previously known for his rapid-fire decision-making and near-impossible standards, began pausing more in meetings. Listening. When an engineer nervously presented a flawed design, expecting a blast of criticism, Elon leaned back in his chair and asked, "What were you thinking when you designed it this way?" That single sentence, softer than usual, diffused the tension in the room. People began to speak more freely, offering solutions before being asked. The office, once a high-pressure environment built on fear of failure, began to hum with the energy of collaboration. Elon still demanded excellence, but now it came with a strange side dish of patience. He didn't tell anyone the real reason for the shift. He didn't explain that waking up 3 times a night to soothe a screaming baby had somehow trained him to breathe differently. Or that trying to get Nevada to eat peas taught him more about persistence than any quarterly review. He just showed up, more human, and let the results speak for themselves. At home, there were still disasters, of course. He once microwaved formula with the metal ring still on the bottle and caused a small fire. Another night, he put Nevada in the bath and forgot to bring a towel, leading to a slippery, frantic rescue mission that left them both soaked and shivering. But even those moments began to feel like training exercises for something larger. Every failure came with a lesson. Every spill demanded a new strategy. Elon realized he wasn't just building rockets, he was building a version of himself he had never met before. One afternoon, he took Nevada for a walk in the park. It had taken 20 minutes to pack the bag, diapers, wipes, snacks, extra socks, a change of clothes, a toy giraffe, but the payoff was worth it. The sun was warm, and Nevada was mesmerized by the wind moving through the trees. As they sat on a bench, Elon pulled out his phone, almost by habit, to check emails. Then he paused. He looked at Nevada's tiny fingers grasping a leaf. The way his mouth formed a perfect O of wonder. Elon locked the phone and put it away. "Look at you," he said softly, "exploring the universe one twig at a time." It struck him then. This was the mission too. Not just Mars, not just reusable rockets or disrupting industries, but raising a human being to be curious, resilient, kind. And doing it without a manual, without algorithms, without a fallback plan. That night, as Nevada drifted off to sleep listening to Bowie's soft croon, Elon stood by the crib and watched him for a long time. The nursery was still cluttered, books on propulsion stacked next to baby bottles, socks tucked behind engineering blueprints, but it felt like home now. He whispered, I thought I had to choose between being a great engineer and being a good dad. But maybe doing one makes me better at the other. Outside, the street was quiet. The stars were out, distant and steady. For the first time in a long while, Elon didn't feel like he was behind. He felt aligned, grounded, and in that stillness, the man who once chased the cosmos with relentless urgency allowed himself to slow down and savor the simple triumph of banana puree. It was a Thursday afternoon when the envelope arrived, folded with bureaucratic precision. Elon had just come back from a long design session at SpaceX, his mind still orbiting around payload configurations and thrust stability. He tossed the mail on the kitchen counter like always, ready to jump back into feeding Nevada before the next nap window vanished. But one piece stood out, no logo, no frills, just his name printed in black ink, unnervingly centered. He opened it while Nevada babbled in the background, chewing on a plastic rocket toy. Elon read the first line once, then again, and again. Petition for sole custody. He sat down on the floor right where Nevada had pulled all the cushions off the couch that morning. The paper trembled slightly in his fingers, not because of anger, not yet, but because the very axis of his new life had been shaken. 4 months now, his routines had evolved around 2 a.m. feedings, teething schedules, and the rhythmic hush-hush song that worked exactly 1 out of every 3 times. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was, but it was theirs. It was real, and now it was being challenged. Nevada giggled, smacking the floor beside him. Elon looked over, his chest tightening. He reached for the baby, scooped him into his lap, and held him a little too tightly. Nevada didn't protest. He just stared up with those impossible blue eyes and blinked slowly. Elon whispered, "We're not losing this. I promise." The next few days felt like boot camp for emotional warfare. Elon, who once memorized orbital parameters overnight, now devoured custody laws, courtroom procedures, and psychological parenting studies. He didn't want to weaponize knowledge. He wanted to understand what he was up against. He reached out to a friend of a friend who recommended a tough but fair attorney named Marlene Vogel. Marlene was pragmatic, seasoned, and didn't blink when Elon walked into her office looking like a man who hadn't slept since 1999. They went over everything: Nevada's medical appointments, his sleep patterns, Elon's work calendar, emergency contact logs, even the favorite lullaby playlist on his phone. "This isn't about making you look perfect," Marlene said. "This is about proving you're consistent, present, and emotionally invested." He nodded, but deep down, he wondered if those things could really be captured on paper. He turned the living room into a visual war room. Pictures were printed and labeled. There was one of Nevada on Elon's shoulders at the park, one of them asleep on the floor in matching pajama sets, one with banana smeared across both of their cheeks. He gathered receipts for diapers, organic baby food, daycare inquiries, even a scribbled thank you note from a neighbor who'd seen Elon carrying Nevada through a rainstorm when the stroller broke. These were not artifacts of a billionaire's lifestyle. They were the traces of a man trying. SpaceX inevitably had to take a back seat. For the first time since its inception, Elon missed a propulsion review meeting. He rescheduled rocket testing to accommodate court dates. Some at the company whispered that he was distracted. Others, like Gwynne Shotwell, simply picked up the slack and sent him kind updates via text with lines like, "Don't worry, we're keeping the ship on course." At night, Elon sat beside Nevada's crib, listening to his son breathe. The baby didn't know about legal motions, subpoenas, or custody hearings. He just wanted warmth, rhythm, and someone who stayed. That's what Elon held on to when doubt crept in, when he wondered if Justine had felt as invisible as she claimed, or whether her decision was a cry for fairness or control. On the 4th night after receiving the letter, Elon broke routine. He didn't reach for blueprints or court documents. Instead, he took a yellow legal pad and wrote a letter to Nevada. It wasn't for court or for public defense. It was a private blueprint of the heart. He wrote about how scared he'd been at first, how much he'd learned in the past months, not just about diapers and pacifiers, but about vulnerability, fear, and the unexpected joy of repetition. He wrote about banana smudge t-shirts, 3 a.m. walks around the block, and the terror of fevers that came out of nowhere. And he ended with this: "I don't want to be the best because I'm Elon Musk. I want to be the best because I'm your dad." The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. Elon didn't announce it to the press. He didn't post cryptic tweets or make statements. It wasn't about branding. It was about belief in himself, in his son, and in the idea that care wasn't a gendered instinct. It was a choice you repeated every day, even when no one was watching. When he walked into Marlene's office that Friday, she gave him a small smile. "You're ready," she said. He didn't answer. He just handed her a neatly bound binder titled Nevada, Proof of Love. Because for once, he wasn't pitching investors or selling a dream. He was showing receipts. And this time, the stakes weren't Mars. They were much closer. They were right there, crawling on the carpet, reaching for his shoe, giggling like nothing else in the world mattered. And for Elon, nothing did. The courtroom was colder than Elon had expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. It had white walls, metallic chairs that echoed with every shift, and fluorescent lights that hummed overhead like a reminder that this wasn't a place for comfort. It was for judgment. Elon sat at a table on the right side, dressed in a dark suit he hadn't worn since a failed investor pitch a year prior. It didn't fit quite right. It hung looser around the shoulders now. His tie was slightly askew, not from carelessness, but from the way Nevada had tugged on it that morning, laughing like it was a game. Across the room, Justine sat poised in a navy dress, her hair brushed to glowing waves that framed her face. She looked beautiful, determined. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Her lawyer, a confident man with silver-rimmed glasses and a tone of polite attack, stood beside her like armor. The bailiff called the room to order. Case number 4728B, custody hearing for Nevada Alexander Musk. Elon's heart gave a hollow thud. The name echoed in his chest louder than it did in the room. The judge was a woman with gray curls pulled into a bun, a lined face that betrayed no emotion. She adjusted her glasses and nodded for the opening statement. Justine's lawyer began. Measured, calm, precise. A story unfolded, not of neglect or abuse, but of concern. He spoke of Elon's irregular hours, his obsession with SpaceX, the demands of launching rockets while raising a child. He mentioned unpredictability, stress, and emotional inconsistency. Then he played the card that made Elon flinch. This child needs a stable environment, one with focus, routine, and the full emotional availability of a parent. Elon stared straight ahead, but his fists were clenched beneath the table. His nails pressed into his palms. He kept his face blank, letting it wash over him like a storm. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of reaction. But each sentence was like a scalpel against everything he'd fought for these past few months. Then it was his turn. His lawyer, a soft-spoken man named David, gave him a look that said, "Be honest." Elon stood slowly. He didn't use notes. Didn't need them. He cleared his throat. "I didn't grow up thinking I'd be a single father," he began. "And I didn't grow up with a good example of what that means. But I've learned more in the last few months than I have in all my years building companies or coding algorithms." He glanced at Nevada, sitting on the lap of a social worker near the back, playing with a stuffed giraffe. "I've failed," Elon admitted. "I've burned food misnaps and once dressed him in a onesie backward. I've been exhausted, confused, terrified. But I've also been there for every laugh, every babble, every night of fever, and every morning smile. I didn't ask for this situation, but I've shown up for it every day." There was silence in the room. No typing from the court reporter. No paper shuffling. "I know I'm not conventional. I don't have a 9 to 5. I have a dream to get humanity to Mars. But that dream taught me how to persist. It taught me that failure is part of progress. And being a father, it's taught me how to listen, how to stay, how to hold on when it's easier to run." His voice cracked on the last word, but he recovered. I'm not asking the court to believe I'm the best parent. I'm asking you to see that I've grown, that I am growing, and that I love my son more than I've ever loved anything in my life." He sat down. The wooden chair creaked beneath him. For a moment, the only sound was Nevada's tiny giggle. He'd tossed the stuffed giraffe into the air and caught it, amused with himself. The social worker smiled and whispered something to him, and he squealed in delight. Elon turned slightly, watching. That smile, toothless, wide, pure, felt like a sunrise after years of fog. Justine looked down at her lap. Her shoulders rose with a quiet breath. She didn't look angry, just tired, and maybe something else. Regret? Grief? It was hard to say. The judge closed her notebook. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she looked at both parents, two people who had once built a life together and now stood in court trying to divide it. "I will issue my decision in writing within a week," she said finally. "In the meantime, shared custody remains in effect." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Justine stood and gathered her purse. She didn't approach Elon, but as she passed, their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, they were just two young adults again, scared and stubborn, trying to do what was right without knowing how. She left without a word. Elon remained seated. The courtroom emptied slowly, lawyers first, then the clerk, then the bailiff. Only he and Nevada remained, the baby now napping in the arms of the social worker. She brought him over gently. "He was very good," she said softly. Elon nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you," he said, taking his son in his arms. The moment Nevada's tiny hand clutched his shirt, everything else faded. The cold courtroom, the arguments, the uncertainty. It was just the two of them again. Like it had been on so many nights, in so many quiet rooms, lit only by night lights and lullabies. Outside, the sky was turning the color of rust and lavender. Elon stepped into the hallway with Nevada pressed against his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, the weight of him, the trust. He had no ruling yet, no verdict, no guarantee. But as he looked down at Nevada's peaceful face, he felt it. A reconnection, a reclamation, not of victory, but of meaning. The city lights faded into a blur as Elon drove through the sleepy streets of Los Angeles. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting everything in cool navy tones. He didn't rush. There was no need. Beside him, in the rear-facing car seat, Nevada was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythmic contentment, mouth slightly open, one hand loosely clenching the strap across his chest. Elon didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need distraction, didn't need data or news or voices. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of Nevada's quiet breathing, of the hum of the car engine, of his own thoughts finally settling into something close to peace. They had just left the courthouse. There had been no dramatic pronouncement, no victorious high five. The judge had spoken plainly, in measured tones, awarding joint custody, but with Elon retaining primary physical care. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to feel like the tide had turned. Enough to feel he had been seen, truly seen, for what he had become, not just a visionary, not just a founder, but a father. A real one. He glanced at Nevada through the rear-view mirror and felt his throat tighten. The baby looked like he belonged there in that moment, as if he had always been part of Elon's life. Yet just a few months ago, this tiny passenger had felt like a puzzle he wasn't equipped to solve. Now he couldn't imagine a version of himself without him. They pulled into the driveway. Elon turned off the engine, but stayed there a moment longer. The car ticked and cooled in the night air. He listened to the stillness, to the soft rustle of Nevada shifting in his sleep, to the distant sound of wind brushing the leaves outside the house. Then, with careful movements, he unbuckled the car seat. Nevada stirred but didn't wake. Elon cradled him close, his hand supporting the small head that always seemed to lean just slightly left. He stepped out into the night and walked toward the front door, each footstep a reminder of how far they had come. Inside, the house welcomed them with its usual gentle chaos. A pair of mismatched socks in the hallway, a half-built rocket toy on the coffee table, a bottle drying on the rack next to a blueprint for the Falcon 1. Elon didn't tidy. He just walked through it all, breathing it in like someone returning to sacred ground. He carried Nevada to the nursery. The night light glowed softly, casting shadows shaped like planets and stars across the ceiling. The crib was already made, Nevada's favorite blanket neatly folded, the stuffed giraffe resting in the corner like a loyal sentinel. Elon laid him down gently. The baby shifted, sucked in a long breath, and settled without opening his eyes. Elon stood there longer than he meant to. He traced the edges of the room with his eyes, the sketch of a rocket that Nevada had accidentally scribbled over the mobile of planets Elon had assembled at 2 a.m. with super glue and engineering wire, the chair where he'd cried during those first impossible nights. So much had changed. He stepped back quietly and walked down the hall to the kitchen. The counter was cluttered, not with spreadsheets or engine components, but with baby spoons, cereal boxes, and a container of half-eaten mashed carrots. He opened the fridge, saw a juice box beside an open packet of soldering flux, and chuckled. His laptop blinked on the table. There were emails waiting, urgent ones. SpaceX needed decisions. The team was testing new alloys for the fuel tanks, and contracts with satellite clients were hanging in limbo. But he didn't open it. Instead, he pulled out a notebook, the kind he used in the early days of Zip 2, and began writing longhand. Not equations, not schematics, just thoughts. He wrote about Nevada's giggle when he touched a bubble for the first time. About the moment in court when Justine's eyes softened as she watched him speak. About the way holding a child could both exhaust and empower him in equal measure. He wrote that love was engineering too, messy, imperfect, demanding. That there were no launch windows, only small doors that opened briefly, then closed if you weren't paying attention. And that fatherhood had its own gravity, just as relentless, just as binding. When he finished, he placed the notebook beside the toaster and returned to the nursery. Nevada was still sleeping, the giraffe now tucked under his arm. Elon sat on the floor back against the crib, knees bent. He remembered what the judge had said as they were leaving. Mr. Musk, parenting isn't a project to conquer. It's a relationship to nurture. He hadn't answered her then. But now, in the silence of this room, he finally understood. The rockets could wait. The code could be cleaned tomorrow. Mars wasn't going anywhere. But this, the sound of soft breathing, the feeling of small victories becoming foundations, this was where life was truly happening. And for once, Elon didn't need to be anywhere else. He closed his eyes, let his head rest against the crib rail, and listened. To the silence, to the breathing, to the hum of something finally falling into place. December 2003. 64 fortnights since Justine had walked out the door with her voice trembling and her heart made of stone and glass. Elon still tracked time that way, not in weeks or months, but in cycles of 14 days, like the internal countdown of a mission still unfolding. He had always been that way, measuring life in intervals, calculating risk, progress, loss. But now those intervals weren't defined by burn rates or delta V calculations. They were milestones of his son's life, first steps, first words, first laughter at a bouncing rubber duck in a bath that had flooded half the kitchen. The house bore the marks of this new version of Elon, walls with fingerprints at toddler height, a clutter of soft books and building blocks under every table, and a soft lull in the air filled with the static hush of rocket launches. Nevada, now almost 2, had grown curious and sturdy. He loved pointing at stars. Any source of light in the ceiling or sky would do, and he called every one of them Go. It was Elon's doing. He had explained in bedtime whispers how rockets travel to the stars, how they go, and now everything that moved with mystery or light was Go. Each night, Elon loaded a SpaceX rocket launch recording, letting the sound of engines ignite and fade into the dark nursery. Nevada would fall asleep to the roaring echoes of Falcon 1 tests, the rhythm of fire and ambition, the lullaby of propulsion. And sometimes Elon stayed there, leaning on the side of the crib, whispering plans that were both blueprints and bedtime stories. He had found a rhythm, chaotic, imperfect human. SpaceX was progressing, not with grandeur but with grit. They had secured a rough warehouse in El Segundo and were debugging their first engine system. Elon juggled between staff meetings, cryogenic tank inspections, and last-minute diaper runs. There was always a stain on his shirt and a pacifier in his pocket, but the fatigue no longer cracked him open. It reshaped him like heat on steel. There were hard days. Days when Nevada had fevers and wouldn't eat. Days when engineers quit, when funding stalled, when reporters questioned his sanity. Days when he missed Justine, not in longing, but in phantom habits, the echo of her voice reading from a novel, the click of her heels on hardwood. But these were fading echoes, softened by the present. He no longer looked for her in every quiet space. Until that Saturday. It was raining. One of those lazy California showers that seemed more like a mist. Elon had just finished cleaning a mess Nevada had made with banana slices and orange juice on the couch. The house smelled faintly of citrus and fabric cleaner. He was kneeling in front of Nevada, adjusting the collar of the boy's tiny NASA hoodie when the doorbell rang. He opened the door expecting a package, maybe groceries. But there she was, Justine. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was damp, rain clinging to the golden waves as if unwilling to fall. Her coat was soaked at the shoulders. Her face, the same structure he had memorized years ago, looked different. Not older, not softer, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a long journey into oneself. "Elon," she said almost breathlessly. He didn't speak. Behind him, Nevada's footsteps padded into the hallway. The boy looked up at the figure in the doorway, then glanced at Elon, confused but calm. Justine knelt down slowly. "Hi," she said, her voice trembling. Nevada blinked. Then, without hesitation, he stepped forward and touched her face. Neither of them cried. Not yet. Elon finally stepped aside, letting her in, though the space between them was still measured not in inches, but in unanswered questions. They sat. No coffee, no tea. Just silence for a while, broken only by the tiny thumps of Nevada stacking blocks beside them. "I've been thinking," Justine finally said, "about everything. About this." He waited. "I'm not here for a fight. I'm not here for an apology," she added. "I'm here because I realize that love doesn't disappear just because it changes shape." Elon didn't answer. His throat was tight. She continued, "I see you. Not the version I walked away from. The one here now. The one Nevada clearly adores." He nodded slowly, unsure of where this would go, unsure if it mattered. "I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up. On him. On being a father." There was no grandeur in the moment. No cinematic swell of strings. Just the rain outside, the soft click of plastic blocks, the quiet breathing of a boy who had become a bridge between two people that had once broken apart. And for the first time in 64 fortnights, Elon stopped counting. There was no need. Elon stood by the doorway, still gripping the frame long after Justine had stepped inside. The storm outside was fading, but its memory lingered in the silence that filled the house. Justine's footsteps were soft on the hardwood floor, but each one echoed like a gavel in Elon's mind. She didn't move quickly. She looked around the room. The toys under the sofa, a sippy cup on the windowsill, a framed drawing Nevada had scribbled with crayons. A red shape that might have been a rocket or a heart, or maybe both. Elon cleared his throat. "You want tea?" Justine gave a faint smile. "Sure, if you're making some." He walked into the kitchen, his movements a bit more deliberate than usual. Nevada was sitting in his high chair, holding a spoon like a wand, yogurt smeared across his cheek and the front of his shirt. He was humming to himself, lost in a world where yogurt could be moon dust and every plastic spoon was a launch pad. Justine watched him with quiet intensity. Her eyes didn't well with tears, not like the last time, but they softened in a way Elon hadn't seen before. There was a weight in her shoulders, but also a calm. It wasn't the look of someone desperate to reclaim the past, but someone trying to understand the present. She sat down at the kitchen table, resting her hands carefully in her lap. Elon placed a mug of tea in front of her without a word and returned to Nevada, wiping his face gently, then kissing his forehead. "How long has he been walking?" she asked, her voice measured. "Since the end of summer," Elon replied. "Talks about rockets non-stop." Justine nodded. "He always liked movement. Even in my belly. He kicked all the time." Elon chuckled lightly. "He hasn't stopped since." The moment hovered between them, not uncomfortable, but undeniably fragile. Justine sipped her tea and took a deep breath. "I've been in therapy. Weekly. For over a year now." Elon looked up, surprised, but said nothing. "I wasn't okay when I left," she continued. "I didn't know how to say it or what I needed. But I couldn't be here. I couldn't be myself or a mother like that." He nodded slowly. "I figured something like that. But you didn't tell me. You just disappeared." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I thought you'd be better off without me." That he would. Nevada tapped the table with his spoon and started talking to his toy astronaut. 5, 4, 3, 2, blast off. Elon smiled at the child, then looked back at Justine. "We made it work. Barely sometimes, but we did." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I see that. He looks happy. You look different." "Parenthood does that," Elon said, his tone sharper than he intended. "You want something you're not qualified for, and then one day you're just doing it. There's no manual. You just stay up all night and hope." "I'm not here to erase what you've done," she said. "I see the love here. I see the effort. But I'm his mother. I never said you weren't." She looked down at her tea, then back up. "I want to rebuild a connection with him. I want to be part of his life again. And eventually, I want to request joint custody." The words fell between them like a dropped glass. Elon stared at her, expression unreadable. Nevada made a whooshing noise, then flung his spoon into the air. It clattered to the floor. Elon picked it up automatically, rinsed it, and handed it back. He didn't respond right away. He sat at the table across from Justine and exhaled deeply. "You're asking to co-pilot a ship that's already in orbit," he said. "It's not a no, but it's not simple either." "I don't expect it to be," she said. They sat for a while in silence, Nevada babbling happily, as if narrating a mission to Mars. Elon watched him and felt the familiar tangle of emotion: pride, fear, love, exhaustion. The idea of sharing this journey again, of trusting someone with it, it felt like opening an old wound. But it also felt like something else, maybe relief. "I need time," he said finally, "and he needs consistency." Justine nodded. "I'll work with that. I don't want to disrupt anything. I just want to start again." Slowly, Elon glanced at Nevada. The boy was now trying to refuel his toy rocket with yogurt. Elon laughed under his breath. "Well, you'll have to like space stuff." Justine smiled. "I can learn." The light outside had shifted. The storm had passed, and a pale yellow glow peeked through the window. Elon noticed how Justine looked in that light. Tired, yes, but grounded. Less like the woman who had fled, and more like someone building something new from the pieces. "I'm not the same person either," he said, "but I never stopped hoping you'd get better. I just stopped expecting it." "I didn't expect you'd get good at this," she said softly, motioning toward Nevada. "Neither did I," he replied. They both looked at the child, who was now playing with a crumpled napkin like it was a control panel. There was something undeniably human in that moment, flawed people trying again, not because it was easy, but because they couldn't imagine doing otherwise. "I'll come by again next weekend," Justine said as she stood up. "If that's okay." Elon paused. "Yeah, that's okay." She walked to the door, pausing for a moment before opening it. The rain had stopped, but everything outside still shimmered with the wet sheen of change. She turned back briefly, just to glance at Nevada once more. He waved at her, not fully understanding who she was, not yet, but curious. Always curious. Justine smiled. "Bye, sweetheart." And then she was gone. Elon closed the door gently and leaned against it, holding onto the doorknob like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He wasn't sure what was coming next. But for now, he looked at Nevada, who handed him a rocket toy and said, "Dada, fly." "Yeah," Elon whispered. "Let's fly." The conference room was too bright, the air conditioning too cold. Elon sat at the head of the long table, staring blankly at a blueprint projected onto the wall. Equations scrawled in the margins of a slide meant nothing now. Someone was speaking, probably Javier, one of the propulsion engineers, but the words were like waves crashing against a glass wall. Elon nodded mechanically, the way one does when trying to mimic participation. Inside, everything was noise. The letter had arrived that morning, folded neatly in an envelope with Justine's new lawyer's logo stamped on the upper corner. Another custody petition. Another storm. This one struck deeper because he had begun to believe they had turned a corner. That co-parenting could exist without fire. That maybe, just maybe, they had reached a peaceful orbit. But the paper said otherwise. It said that progress had been misread, that agreements were fragile, that she wanted more time, more say, more of Nevada. By noon, Elon had canceled his appearance at a manufacturing facility. By 2, he had snapped at a systems analyst for a simple question. And by 4, he was sitting in a bathroom stall in the SpaceX building, hunched forward, chest tight, palms sweating, trying to remember how to breathe. He closed his eyes, pressed his fists to his forehead, and told himself to get it together. Rockets failed. Launches aborted. But this was his son. This was life. When he got home, the house was dimly lit, with traces of the afternoon sun bleeding through the blinds. Nevada came sprinting from a hallway, his feet thudding softly against the wood floor. "Daddy," he called, a flash of joy that cut through Elon's fog like a beacon. He was holding a piece of paper clutched in one hand, the other covered in marker ink. Elon bent to meet him, his tired frame barely holding. "What do you have there, buddy?" Nevada unfolded it with both hands, revealing a crayon drawing with bold, erratic lines. In the center was a crude rocket ship, drawn with lopsided fins and streaks of red. Inside the rocket, 2 stick figures. One had spiky brown hair, clearly Nevada's interpretation of himself. The other had a square head, blue dots for eyes, and long fingers that looked like spider legs. Elon smiled weakly. That was him. Hovering above the rocket was a big red heart, imperfect but unmistakable. Elon stared at it, a lump forming in his throat. "Is this us?" he asked. Nevada nodded. "We're going to the moon. Together." Elon didn't answer. He just sank to the floor, pulling Nevada into his lap. The drawing fluttered beside them. And then, without warning, the tears came. Not silent, dignified tears, but full sobs, messy, human, cathartic. Nevada, sensing something strange, looked up with wide eyes and touched Elon's cheek. "It's okay, Daddy." Was it? He didn't know. All he knew was that he was tired. Tired of fighting legal paperwork, of second-guessing every bedtime, of explaining missed pickups and mixed messages. He was tired of having to prove his love through documents, of walking a tightrope where one slip could be used against him in court. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because his son was in his arms. Because a rocket and a heart drawn in crayon said more than any legal brief ever could. It reminded him that this wasn't about winning. It was about being present. About making sure that Nevada never felt like a pawn between 2 grown-ups playing tug-of-war. Later that evening, after dinner and bath time, Elon sat at his desk with Nevada asleep in the next room. The house was quiet. The drawing sat beside his laptop, its colors still vibrant under the lamp's warm light. He stared at it as he opened his email, beginning to draft a message to his lawyer. He wanted to propose something different. A conversation, maybe? Mediation. Something less combative than a courtroom. He paused. That word again, combat. Why did parenthood have to be that? Why did love have to come with documentation? There had to be a better way. A path where love wasn't dissected, measured, or proved. His phone buzzed. A message from Gwynn Shotwell about a meeting reschedule. Elon replied quickly, then opened a new tab. He started researching child-focused custody agreements. Models from Europe. Concepts of shared time rooted in trust, not division. He read case studies about co-parents who built schedules not around fairness, but around the child's rhythm. It made him think about Nevada's rhythms. How he slept better after listening to rocket sounds. How he liked breakfast on the porch because the birds reminded him of launch countdown beeps. How he danced when Elon played Bowie on Saturday mornings. Those were the pulses that mattered, not who had more overnight stays or longer weekends. He got up, stretched, and walked to Nevada's room. The door creaked gently as he opened it. The boy was curled on his side, mouth slightly open, one arm draped over a stuffed animal in a space suit. Elon stepped closer, brushed a stray hair from his forehead, and whispered, "We'll figure it out, kiddo. I promise." He didn't sleep much that night, but not from dread, from determination. By morning, Elon had sent a message to Justine, not through lawyers, just a plain human message. It said he wanted to talk, not to fight, not to argue, to talk about Nevada, about what was best, about who they were now, not who they used to be. And when he hit send, he felt something shift. The storm hadn't passed, but for the first time in days, he felt centered within it. Not because he had control, but because he had clarity. Nevada wasn't his to win. He was someone to love, someone to protect, someone to grow with. And no storm, no matter how loud, could erase that. The second courtroom felt different from the first. Not colder, just quieter. Elon noticed how everything had become sharper. The ticking of the clock above the judge's bench, the shuffle of papers echoing through the room, even the squeak of someone's leather shoe on the tile floor. There was a nervous stillness in the air, like a spacecraft just before ignition. This wasn't just a legal hearing. It was an orbit-deciding moment. Justine sat across the aisle, composed, her hands neatly folded in her lap. Her expression was calm, her posture straight. But her eyes, those familiar green eyes, held something Elon hadn't seen in a long time: clarity. She looked healthier than he remembered. There was a steadiness to her voice when she spoke, and her lawyer let her do most of the talking. "I'm not here to erase Elon," she said, her voice firm but not aggressive. "I'm here because I want to be part of my son's life again. I've taken time to work on myself. Therapy, stability, healing. I don't want to take Nevada away. I want to share him. I want to rebuild trust, not destroy it." Elon listened, nodding slightly. He wasn't sure if it was agreement or simple acknowledgement. Maybe both. A part of him admired her courage. Another part feared the disruption it could bring. The judge, an older man with a thick mustache and a soft but unreadable expression, scribbled notes silently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod. He just listened. Impartial, unshakable. When it was Elon's turn, he stood slowly, his palms damp. He didn't bring a script. He never did. Not for courtrooms. Not for rocket launches. Not even for marriage. He only brought what he carried in his chest. "I'm not a perfect man," he began, his voice low but steady. "I wasn't a perfect husband. I admit that. But in the past year and a half, I've done my best to be a better father. And it changed me more than I expected." He took a breath and reached into the folder his lawyer handed him. He pulled out printed photos, Nevada's first steps in the backyard, his first Halloween costume, a silver-painted cardboard rocket, his crayon drawings, his tiny fingers pressed into clay from daycare. Then came short home videos. Elon showed a montage on a tablet screen. Nevada babbling as he stacked blocks. Nevada asleep on Elon's chest. Nevada dancing wildly to a Bowie song in his socks. Then Elon held up a small notebook, Nevada's daycare report log. "Every time he had a fever, I was there. Every fall, every night he couldn't sleep unless I hummed to him. I've been there. And not just as a caretaker. I've learned how to comfort, how to wait, how to listen." He looked directly at Justine, who was holding back tears now. "I know you're his mother, and I know we both love him. I'm not here to fight against you. I'm here to protect what's been built. Not just routine or familiarity, but trust. A relationship. A bond that wasn't handed to me. It was earned. Day by day, night by night." The room was quiet again. No one stirred. Even the judge stopped writing. Elon sat down, heart thudding in his chest like a failing thruster. But he didn't feel regret. He'd said what he needed to say, and that in itself felt like a release. After closing arguments, the judge spoke. "I'll take everything into consideration," he said calmly. "My decision will be delivered next week." And just like that, it was over. At least for the moment. Elon walked out of the courtroom with his lawyer. Reporters waited outside, but he ignored them. He stepped into the car waiting at the curb, opened the back door, and there was Nevada, secured in his car seat, looking up with curious blue eyes. "Did you win, Daddy?" Nevada asked in his small, unsure voice. Elon smiled, but not in triumph. He leaned forward, brushing a hand gently over his son's fine blonde hair. "We'll find out soon," he said softly. "But no matter what, I'm here." The drive back home was quiet. Elon stared out the window at the drizzle painting the city in moving reflections. His phone buzzed with missed calls, messages, SpaceX updates, but he didn't answer any of them. His mind was occupied with something far less calculated than thrust ratios or material tolerances. He was trying to decipher the human variable. When they got home, Nevada ran to the living room and picked up his markers. He began drawing on a fresh sheet of paper, humming to himself. Elon dropped his keys on the table and collapsed onto the couch. He felt drained, his whole body heavy with emotion. After a few minutes, Nevada toddled over with the drawing. "This is you," he said proudly, pointing to a tall stick figure in a blue rocket. "And this is me." Elon noticed the heart again, drawn in thick red lines, right in the center of the rocket. The drawing was crude, childlike, messy, but it was everything. For all the things Elon had invented, launched, and financed in his life, none carried the weight of this one symbol drawn with wobbly fingers and a generous imagination. He pulled Nevada close, hugging him tightly. No court decision could define this. No document could replace it. He was no longer simply fighting to keep custody. He was fighting to preserve a connection that had become his grounding force. Later that night, while Nevada slept in his small bed under the glow-in-the-dark stars Elon had stuck on the ceiling, Elon sat by the window, watching the rain gather on the glass. He didn't know what the judge would decide. He didn't know if peace was around the corner or if another legal storm awaited. But he did know one thing for sure. The next step wasn't about strategy. It was about love and showing up, again and again, no matter what. For the first time in what felt like years, Elon Musk's calendar was empty by choice. No calls with investors, no design reviews, no fire drills at the launch site. Just white space, intentionally preserved like the untouched margin of a child's drawing, space for something new, something sacred. He stood at the doorway of Nevada's room that morning, watching the boy sleep. His small chest rose and fell beneath a blanket decorated with rockets and stars. One hand clutched a soft model of the Falcon 1, the fabric slightly torn near the fins. Elon smiled, not a corporate grin or media-ready expression, but something soft and unguarded. It felt foreign on his face. When Nevada finally woke up, blinking slowly like he was calibrating to a new day, Elon sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "Let's disappear today." And they did. They started at the park near the old apartment, the one Elon hadn't visited since Justine left. Nevada insisted on pushing his own stroller, even though it meant veering into trees and bumping curbs. Elon didn't correct him. He just walked beside him, letting the small frustrations happen, trusting Nevada to find his own rhythm. At the playground, Elon sat on a bench, no phone in hand. That alone would have shocked half of Silicon Valley. He watched Nevada try to master the monkey bars, failing gloriously, tumbling into wood chips and laughing like gravity was just another game. Later, at a pancake diner off Ventura Boulevard, they ordered chocolate chip stacks with whipped cream smiley faces. Elon let Nevada eat dessert before lunch for the first time in his life. The syrup dripped onto the table, the floor, Nevada's pants. Elon didn't flinch. He just wiped it with a napkin and said, "Now you're officially a Musk." Nevada beamed. "Is that like a superhero?" Elon paused, his smile faltering as he studied the boy's expectant eyes. "Something like that," he replied. That afternoon, they visited the Griffith Observatory. It was Elon's idea, but Nevada was the one who pulled him room to room. They stared at lunar samples behind glass, built model rockets from foam pieces, and watched an old film about Galileo that made Nevada whisper, "He looks like Santa, but sad." Elon couldn't help but laugh. They returned home after dark, both exhausted, their shoes full of park sand and pancake crumbs clinging to Nevada's shirt. Elon left the lights off and carried his son into the living room, where the outlines of scattered toys and crayon drawings decorated the floor like constellations. "Want to draw some stars?" Elon asked. Nevada nodded sleepily, but perked up when Elon rolled out butcher paper across the floor. They knelt together, scribbling with waxy blues and purples. Elon's stars were geometric, mathematically perfect. Nevada's were lopsided and exploded with color. Somewhere in between, the paper turned into a galaxy. "Papai," Nevada said, dragging the crayon across the paper like it was a comet. "Agente vipra Marte?" Elon looked down at the question. Not at the child, but at the world he had created, this bright, beating world of tiny socks and sticky fingers, bedtime stories, and high-pitched giggles. "One day," he said softly. "Maybe." Nevada tapped his chin, thoughtful like a tiny philosopher. "But I don't want to go without you." "You won't have to," Elon said, "because right now this is our planet." Nevada looked up, his eyes reflecting the soft ceiling light, like twin moons. "What's it called?" Elon put down the crayon. "Love," he answered. Nevada nodded like that made complete sense and went back to drawing Saturn with a smiley face. Elon watched him, the boy's small hand looping circles around imaginary orbits. And suddenly, all the trial runs and funding meetings, the propulsion failures and structural redesigns, none of them compared to this. To loving someone who expected nothing but presence. Later that night, after Nevada fell asleep clutching a star-shaped pillow, Elon stood by the window and watched the Los Angeles rain. It tapped against the glass with delicate urgency, like nature trying to get his attention. He thought about the hearing, about Justine, about how time didn't always heal, but it taught. She had looked genuinely changed, calmer, more grounded. But still, something in her request unsettled him. Not because he thought she didn't deserve a role in Nevada's life, but because it reopened the ache of separation, of loss. But standing there in the silence of a child's deep sleep, he realized that love wasn't about possession. It wasn't about rights or winning or past grievances. It was about being there, through tantrums and triumphs, through broken rocket models and soggy pancakes, through questions about Mars and nights filled with tears and wonder. Elon walked into Nevada's room and sat on the floor back against the wall, watching his son sleep. The night light cast soft glows across the spaceship wallpaper, and the only sound was Nevada's even breathing. Elon closed his eyes and whispered to the quiet, "Thank you for choosing me." He wasn't sure who he was talking to, Nevada, the universe, or himself. But it didn't matter. This was their planet now, and it was enough. The courtroom had never felt more silent. Even the soft shuffle of papers or the creak of a wooden bench seemed too loud, too intrusive. Elon sat with his hands folded in front of him, fingers twitching now and then, not from nervousness, but from anticipation. He'd rehearsed this moment so many times in his head, imagined outcomes ranging from full custody to complete loss, but now that he was here, everything felt unfamiliar. The wood grain on the table, the sound of the judge clearing his throat, even the filtered sunlight through the tall windows, all felt foreign, like he'd walked onto a stage he never wanted to be on. Across from him, Justine sat quietly, her hands resting gently in her lap. Her eyes were tired but clear, as though the long road behind them had been painful but cleansing. They hadn't spoken much outside of logistics and legal formalities these past weeks, and now the culmination of months of legal and emotional entanglement stood a few breaths away. The judge, an older man with a measured voice and steady gaze, began to speak. "This is one of the most sensitive cases I've had the honor and the burden of judging," he said, his tone carrying both weight and sincerity. "I have observed two people who clearly love their son, and I commend both of you for the transformation you've undergone in the pursuit of what's best for him." Elon's throat tightened. He resisted the urge to look at Justine, unsure if he was ready to meet whatever expression might be on her face. Gratitude, relief, guilt, but love alone, the judge continued, is not always the only factor. This court must consider the environment, the stability, and perhaps most crucially, the availability of the parent to provide full-time care. Elon's heart sank before the final sentence even landed. He had known deep down that his schedule, even with all his recent sacrifices, was still erratic. SpaceX was more than a job. It was a mission, relentless forward motion that left little room for spontaneity, for fevers at midnight or scraped knees on a Wednesday morning. The custody of Nevada Musk, the judge declared, will be granted to his mother, Justine Wilson Musk, with extensive visitation rights provided to his father, Elon Musk. For a moment, time didn't just slow, it stopped. Elon's breath caught in his chest, not from surprise, but from finality. There it was. The outcome written on dozens of late-night notes and hypothetical timelines now printed in the air like ink on a verdict. Justine exhaled audibly, a long-held breath escaping her lungs. She didn't smile. There was no celebration, only a subtle bow of her head, as if honoring the gravity of the moment. Elon looked down at his hands. They felt too big, too exposed. For weeks, they had held Nevada's cereal bowls, buttoned his coats, built cardboard rockets on the living room floor. Those same hands now sat idle, unable to shape the one outcome that mattered most. He finally looked up and met Justine's eyes. She glanced at him, not with triumph, but with a soft recognition. There was pain there too, even if shaped differently. He nodded once, slowly. It wasn't surrender. It was acknowledgement. They were both walking out of this room as parents of the same child, no longer a couple, but still tethered by something deeper than the ink on court documents. In the quiet that followed, a soft squeal of laughter echoed from a bench behind them. Nevada, perched on the lap of a social worker, was scribbling on the condensation of the window pane. The morning had been cool, and a thin mist had gathered on the glass. With his tiny finger, he began drawing shapes, first a squiggle, then what looked like a capital E. He paused, then added an N. Elon whispered aloud before realizing. E-N. Nevada looked over his shoulder, beaming as if he had just discovered a hidden galaxy. Elon smiled, tight-lipped but warm. The lump in his throat returned, heavier now. After the proceedings ended, the courtroom emptied slowly. Lawyers exchanged papers, clerks packed up files, and Elon stood alone by the door, watching Nevada grab his mother's hand. Justine lifted their son into her arms with care, whispering something into his ear that made him giggle. Elon approached them, not with hesitation, but with a quiet sort of reverence. "I'll call tomorrow," he said, unsure if it was a question or a statement. Justine nodded. "You're always welcome. He'll want to talk about the rocket drawings." Elon looked at Nevada one last time. "I'll bring the Mars map next time," he said. "Red planet," Nevada replied sleepily, laying his head on his mother's shoulder. Elon watched them walk away, their silhouettes framed in the door's golden light. The hallway outside buzzed with distant conversations and the echo of footsteps, but in Elon's mind, there was only stillness. Back at home later that night, the silence was deeper than usual. He didn't turn on the lights right away. He walked through the living room, now oddly tidy, without the usual trail of toys and crayon wrappers. On the floor near the coffee table, he found a lone piece of paper, a drawing Nevada had started and abandoned, half-colored stars and the curve of what was meant to be Saturn's ring. He picked it up carefully, held it like a precious artifact. His chest rose and fell with a slow breath. This was not defeat. This was evolution. He hadn't lost a son. He had gained a new understanding of what being a father truly meant, not control, not possession, but presence. Even if that presence came in segments and weekend visits. He sat down, crayon still on the table, and began to color in the rest of Saturn's ring. Not perfectly, not with an artist's hand, but with intention. Because this, he realized, was a different kind of engineering, not of rockets or cars, but of memories. And he would build them one moment at a time. The Sundays arrived like quiet gifts. No alarms, no calendar reminders blinking with urgency, no SpaceX emergencies or court dates looming over the day. Just the soft rhythm of weekend mornings and the familiar weight of a small backpack filled with snacks, crayons, and a single well-loved toy rocket. Nevada now ran to Elon's car, not with confusion or hesitation, but with joy, the pure kind only toddlers can generate. Elon would kneel, arms open, catching him in mid-leap. It was their ritual now. A father and son reuniting not under the shadow of legal terms, but in the light of something far simpler, time. At first, it was awkward. Elon had to relearn the flow of shared parenting. There were pickup windows, nap schedules, updates from daycare that came through co-written notes between him and Justine. But slowly, the logistics became routine. The transition between homes grew gentler. Nevada didn't cry at drop-offs. Justine didn't double-check every detail. Elon stopped second-guessing himself. Trust was rebuilding, quietly, steadily, like the scaffold of a rocket taking form in a hangar. Elon had returned to SpaceX full-time, but not with the same tunnel vision. He still worked tirelessly, still dreamed of Mars, but something had shifted. In strategy meetings, he no longer paced like a storm. He listened more, delegated more. At home, he unplugged during the hours that mattered. Dinner wasn't just food now, it was FaceTime. Conversation, laughter over spilled juice, and poorly told knock-knock jokes. One evening, after Nevada traced a rocket shape in ketchup across his plate, Elon asked, "What would you call your spaceship if you had one?" Nevada thought for a second. "Sky Hug." Elon blinked. "Sky Hug." The boy nodded with a grin. "Because it hugs the stars." Elon chuckled. "That's actually better than most names in aerospace." Justine, who had stayed for dinner that night, smiled at the exchange from across the table. Her presence in Elon's home had become rare, but not uncomfortable. Sometimes she came in to drop off Nevada. Sometimes she stayed for a cup of tea. There were no big talks anymore, no postmortems about the marriage. But there was understanding. Quiet, respectful understanding. As if they had both accepted that what broke between them wasn't unforgivable, just permanent. One afternoon, Elon installed a telescope on the small patio outside his home. It wasn't just any telescope, it was one of the best commercially available models, something he'd researched for weeks. It arrived in parts, and he spent hours assembling it himself, refusing help, wanting to feel the process with his own hands. When Nevada saw it, he gasped as if Elon had planted a rocket in their backyard. "Can we see Mars?" he asked. "On the clearest nights," Elon said. "And the moon, Saturn, maybe even Jupiter." That Sunday evening, Nevada stayed up past his usual bedtime. The sky was unusually cooperative, crisp, cloudless, the stars bold against the black canvas of space. Elon adjusted the focus, explaining softly how the lens worked, how light traveled, how what they saw was actually the past captured in beams. Nevada didn't understand all of it, but he listened the way children do, with wonder, not analysis. Justine arrived with a warm blanket for Nevada, and after hesitating for a moment, sat on the bench beside Elon. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer advice. She just watched Nevada press his eye to the telescope's viewfinder, a delighted gasp escaping his lips as he shouted, "I see the moon." Elon looked at Justine. He thinks it belongs to him now. She smiled. "It kind of does." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, wrapped in darkness and starlight, a truce held not by words, but by the shared love of the boy between them. "Thank you," Justine said finally. Elon turned toward her, puzzled. "For fighting," she continued. "Not against me, but for him, for this. You didn't give up." He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on Nevada, who now traced constellations in the air with his finger. "I almost did," Elon admitted. "I thought maybe the court decision meant I had to pull back, be smaller in his life." Justine shook her head. "You couldn't, even if you tried. He carries you." The words landed deeper than she likely knew. That night, as Nevada slept in Elon's guest room, now filled with star maps, foam rockets, and a night light shaped like Saturn. Elon lingered in the doorway. He watched his son breathe, chest rising in the calm cadence of dreams. The child who once cried through sleepless nights now hummed softly in his sleep, his lips forming shapes of words from bedtime stories and star names. Elon didn't know what the future held for SpaceX, for his co-parenting relationship with Justine, for Nevada. But he knew this much: the launch had happened. They were no longer on the pad. They were in orbit. Not perfect, not stable, but held together by gravity stronger than law or logic. Love, presence, forgiveness. And in the quiet sky above, scattered with blinking stars, the skyhug was already on its way. Nevada had fallen asleep on the living room rug, a picture book about Mars resting open across his tiny chest. The pages fluttered slightly under the breeze from the ceiling fan, revealing red dunes, domes, and astronauts in bulky suits staring out across alien landscapes. His arm was curled around a plush rocket, clutching it like a promise. Elon watched him for a moment from the doorway, his expression unreadable, a tangle of pride, fatigue, and something gentler that didn't quite have a name. Quietly, he crossed the room, crouched down beside his son, and eased the book from his chest. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Elon pulled a soft blanket from the sofa and tucked it around Nevada with care, smoothing a wisp of nearly golden hair from his forehead. He stayed crouched there a few seconds longer than necessary, just watching him breathe. He thought, this was the launch that mattered. The hallway creaked as he moved toward the balcony. The house was dim and warm, the kind of quiet that only came after the long sigh of a busy day. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, smelling faintly of eucalyptus from the trees planted along the back fence. Elon leaned on the railing, eyes lifted toward the sky. The stars were sharp tonight, pinpricks of silver across a deep navy canvas. Somewhere out there, in a hangar in the Mojave Desert, Falcon 1 sat in pieces, waiting to be assembled. The test flight was scheduled for next month. Years of work, sleepless nights, countless redesigns. The pressure was enormous. A failure could mean financial collapse, a death blow to his dream of interplanetary existence. But in that moment, standing barefoot on the patio, the weight didn't feel as heavy. He had lived through something harder, something more unpredictable, more delicate. He had learned to hold a bottle with one hand while typing code with the other. He had learned how to calm night terrors with a flashlight and a made-up story about rocket ships that glow in the dark. He had learned how to apologize, how to listen, how to choose love over pride. And somehow, in the process, he had learned how to be more than just a visionary. Behind him, the screen door slid open with a soft sound. Justine stepped out, wearing one of Elon's old sweaters over her dress. Her hair was down, catching moonlight. She didn't say anything at first, just walked to his side and looked up at the stars with him. "He's growing so fast," she said finally, her voice low and warm. Elon nodded. "And so are we." She smiled, and it wasn't the smile of the woman he once married. It was something new, wiser, calmer. They weren't together, not in the traditional sense. But there was an understanding between them now, a rebuilt bridge that no longer carried blame. Only shared history and a boy who had pulled them both back into alignment. They stood there for a long time, not speaking, not needing to. A shooting star passed overhead, and Elon didn't make a wish. He already had more than he thought he'd be allowed. Eventually, Justine turned toward the door. "I should go," she said softly. Elon glanced back through the window toward Nevada, still sleeping with the toy rocket. "Thanks for staying." She paused. "Thank you for letting me." He watched her go, then turned back to the night. In the silence, he pictured the first Falcon rocket lifting off, trailing flame and noise into the upper atmosphere. He imagined it trembling under pressure, shaking loose every fear he'd ever tried to bury. But the roar in his mind faded into quiet, not because it failed, but because he now knew that real milestones didn't always explode across the sky. Some arrive gently, in the quiet hum of a child's breath, or in the way two people could stand side by side in peace after weathering a storm. He went back inside, turned off the light, and joined Nevada on the floor. The rug was soft, the house was still, and Mars would wait for morning. Now it's your turn. What city are you watching this from? And tell me, have you ever had to rebuild something important in your life like Elon did? Don't just scroll away. Drop your story in the comments. Sometimes the quietest things we share end up meaning the most.